solder and I'm putting it on the motherboard right on that spot that I filed out. And I'll show a close-up to the camera once I'm done this. Now, you don't want the exposed connections at the end of that wire to be too long, otherwise they might short circuit with something else on the motherboard. You want to keep them short. You can't really see exactly what I'm doing here, but I'll show a close-up to the camera. I'm just soldering that little red wire to the spot on the motherboard where I filed out, a spot where I could solder. And I'm just trying to be exact here. I like to be precise, and I want to make sure that that wire is not short-circuiting with anything else. And I like to grab it. You see what I did there? I'm going to keep this in the film. It's not quite a blooper. I always test. After I make a solder connection, I yank it with my pliers and make sure that the solder connection is strong. Because if it's not, and that connection wasn't, the customer will be back. So I always do it the plier test at the end, and just make sure the solder connection is strong. So now I'm going to resolder the connection and see if we can make a stronger bond. Again, I know you can't see my hands in the way, but I'll show you the finished product as soon as I get it soldered on. And this is what we're going for. Once that gets clear, I'm going to freeze frame it here. Now I want you to take a look here at the placement of the wire and what I did exactly. I soldered the part on the right, the solder point on the right. That's soldered to the post. That's actually soldered to the post that's coming through the motherboard from the DC jack. And it's soldered right to the end of that post. Then the wire wraps around, and then the solder point on the left-hand side solders to a point that I filed down on the motherboard. Now this basically creates just a connection from the post to a spot on the motherboard where the post should be connecting to. I hope that makes sense. What I'm doing is creating flexibility in that power jack. So see that center pin? That center pin actually bends all the way around through the motherboard and onto one of the solder points that I created. Now I'm going to take the pliers and just test the strength of the connection again. I'm not going to yank too hard, but reasonably tough just to make sure that it makes a strong connection. And it looks okay, so we're going to leave that soldering the way it is. That's done on the bottom. Now these are a little tricky because that power jack, the tip, which basically that tip turns into a post as it comes out of the back of the power jack, that post connects to 2 points on the motherboard. The point that I just soldered to and another point on the top of the motherboard. So there's two, and this is kind of rare, there's 2 points of contact that this post makes on the motherboard. One on the top and one on the bottom. So bottom we just handled. The top, again, we're going to file a little space on the motherboard where that post should be connecting to. We're going to put a little drop of solder on there once we get that filed down so the solder will stick. And then we're going to repeat the process. We're going to take a piece of wire, run it from the back of the power jack, which is the post, to the top part of the motherboard, to the spot I just filed down. I'm going to freeze frame it again here once this gets in view and show you exactly what I did. Now I want you to take a look at this close-up. This arrow is pointing to the post that's coming out the back of the power jack. That's your positive connector. That's the same thing that's coming out this side of the power jack, which is the tip in the middle of that jack. That tip goes and comes out the back of the jack as a post and attaches to this spot on the motherboard. You'll see the little drop of solder I created right here, which is on the same contact point that would be touching, that post would be touching. Now as you'll see, I'm going to be creating a connection from the post to that solder point I just created using a wire. So I'm basically doing the same purpose, the same function as the original power jack did, except I'm using a wire again, just to give it a little flexibility, but it's touching the motherboard in the same spot that the post would be, except we're using a wire. Hope that makes sense again, like I said, and we'll see how it turns out. Now I'm going to take the file again here, and this time I'm going to scuff up the back post of the power jack, which is the center pin. Comes out the back of the power jack. It's now becomes a post that goes into the motherboard. I'm going to attach our wire from this post to that solder point I created, but I need to scuff up and scratch up that post so the solder will stick, and that's what I'm doing with this file here. Just take the toothbrush and brush away any little metal particles. I'm going to take a little bit of solder, I'm going to drop it right on that back post. This could get a little tricky, that's